That's a screen of you guys. Share. All righty.
Yep.
That's not the slide I want. Ooh, goes full screen when this happens.
There you go.
All right. Do we have people still filing in? Hello, everyone. Good to see you. There's a lot of you. We allowed extra time for questions because of that this time around. Excited today because I'm not really the host. It is the National Stewardship Action Council, but since NAMA has hosted the website and the registration, we're also putting all of the, if you haven't been there already, the presentations as well as the webinar recording are located again at this this location. And I'm going to just go through what we've seen so far. So we started with, you see the word safe repeated in here a few times. It's so critical with this particular stream. So safely collect some things on chemistry. We had some people from some national labs talk chemistry and what they're doing to work ahead. That was great. I have learned a lot through these, and I consider myself fairly knowledgeable, but this has been great for me, so I've appreciated it. And today we're all the way up to extended producer responsibility. The one thing I just want to say before we get started, no, I think I'll say two things. One is you have to use the question and answer function if you'd like to ask a question versus chat. And that's just how these are set up. Presenters get to chat between each other, and we will monitor that question and answer section. If it's a quick, easy question and we know the answer, we'll put it in there. Otherwise, we'll save them for after the presentation. So that's kind of how we'll run that. And I may also send out a survey at the conclusion here. To be honest, after all I've learned through these webinars, I feel like we need another one to sort of bring together some of the concepts we learned and things we can do next as collectors and manufacturers and everyone. So I am hoping to send out a survey, see if that makes sense. And then that survey would also have a link to the reduced rate to join NAMA for new people attending these webinars. So we'll follow up with that. And with that, I'm done and stopping sharing. And we have Jordan Wells from the National Stewardship Action. I apologize. I can't talk and run my computer at the same time. Council here today. There she is. And I'm going to stop sharing my face as well. Welcome, Jordan. Thank you for getting this set up, and we're excited to hear from you. And we have Suna from, oh, I'll let you do that part. I was going to list all the speakers. Thanks. I'm going to somehow make myself stop video. There we go. And mute.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I
Jordan.
want to say thank you first to NAMA for hosting this webinar series and allowing us to co-host this EPR session today. And I especially want to thank Jennifer. She's put a tremendous amount of work into this webinar series, and I don't think it would have happened without her. So just want to acknowledge her. So the National Stewardship Action Council, sorry, I didn't let you know, I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications at the National Stewardship Action Council. We go by NSAC for short, and we're a 501c4 nonprofit. What that means is that we can lobby unlimitedly at any level of government across the United States. Our vision is that the US attains an equitable, circular economy, and we advocate that producers should fairly share responsibility in that circular and equitable economy. We collaborate with public, private, and nonprofit stakeholders to achieve a circular and equitable economy. And you might know our executive director, Heidi Sanborn, Here she is giving the keynote at the 2023 WasteCon, or actually 2022, I apologize, in December in San Diego. We have an amazing board. We have 10 people on the board currently. 5 are women and 3 identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, something that we're extremely proud of. And our bylaws allow up to 14 people to sit on the board. So we are open to having new board members. If anyone's interested, please contact me. Happy to give you more information and next steps. We also formed a 501c3, the Stewardship Action Foundation, last year, and it focuses mainly on education, facilitation, bridge building, and outreach to support NSEC's policy efforts. We have a smaller board for the C3, but it also has room for more members, so that is an opportunity as well. And 501c3s, it's called the halo effect, and it's tax deductible and a lot easier for local governments and foundations to fund. So what is the circular economy that we advocate for? We go by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation definition, which has 3 key pillars. The first is that we have to design out waste and pollution. The second is keeping products and materials in use. And lastly, we need to regenerate our natural systems. It's not okay to do less bad. We need to actually regenerate all the harm that we've done. And I like to look at it this way: it decouples economic activity from the consumption of finite resources, because we live on a planet with finite resources. Obviously, today we're talking about lithium batteries, and across the country, we're seeing more and more fires caused by lithium batteries and gas cylinders. And here's just some of the articles that have come out, some of the headlines. And this one on the top right, while we can't, it hasn't been identified that it was necessarily a battery. The folks that are driving the trucks are trained that if they see a fire, to dump their load. And what happened in Southern California is they dumped their load and actually caused a mobile home park to catch fire, and somebody died. So this is a very serious issue, and I know Doug's going to speak more to some of the battery fires that have happened in California, specifically in the Bay Area, that have caused millions of dollars in damage, shut down their facility, and required them to get a patchwork of insurance policies that were substantially more expensive. It's a huge threat to our industry and our workers. So, obviously what we have done in the past isn't working. Fires are continuing. And, Einstein didn't say this, although people think so. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. So we have to think differently. And that's why we look to extended producer responsibility. And I wanted to just highlight the difference between EPR for short and product stewardship. We advocate for EPR because that is an internalized cost. The producers must fund and operate the program, and the government's role is to provide oversight and enforcement. Product stewardship, however, are generally consumer paid fees, and the producers that run the program are playing with consumer money, not their own money. So it impacts their decisions. And as with any legislation, especially EPR, the devil is always in the details. So I just wanted to give a little background on how we got to where we are today. And it's all thanks to Alameda County. Huge thank you to them and their leadership. They were the first to pass an EPR ordinance in the US for medications. They were sued by the pharmaceutical industry. It was taken all the way up to the US Supreme Court that denied to hear the case. So the lower court ruling stood, and that was on Alameda's side. And essentially it said that as long as the product has a public health and safety nexus, EPR is allowed at any level of government across the US. And that is the role of government, is to protect the public health and safety. So here's a list of the product stewardship and EPR bills that have been passed in California. You can see batteries just happened last session. And you can see that paint, carpet, and mattresses are all visible fees. So there's stewardship programs here in California. One thing I want to highlight that I think got us to where we are today is the Senator Eggman created in law, the statewide commission on recycling markets and curbside recycling. And their role was to provide guidance to the legislature on how to solve California's recycling crisis. My boss, Heidi Sanborn, was appointed to the commission. She was one of 16 commissioners, and she was elected chair by her fellow commissioners, which she served as chair for 2 years. And they actually came out with 34 policy recommendations. I think over half actually ended up becoming either a bill that or a budget play, and many of those became law. So it was extremely successful. And the number one recommendation that came out of that commission and that brain trust, there was haulers on the commission, there were local governments and NGOs like ours. And their number one recommendation was to put out the fires. And that includes EPR for household hazardous waste. We're based in Sacramento, California, and so a lot of the work we do is here, and then we take that nationwide and across into other states. Just wanted to paint a little bit of a picture. I'm not going to go in too much into California's law, but it took many years to get here. A lot of failures, as you can see, and from 2010 to 2021. But we kept at it, and that's how we got the bills that we got last year. We didn't let go. And I just want to share some key lessons learned through dealing with all the stewardship and EPR laws is that, like I said, the visible fees do not impact the company's bottom line, and that's why we advocate for EPR. We want you guys to, if you're looking to pursue legislation, EPR legislation, making sure that there's strong convenience requirements and there's recycling rates and dates. A lesson that we learned in California with the carpet program is the metric was continuous and meaningful improvement. Well, come to find out that's extremely hard to enforce. So you need to have, 65% by 2035, specific rates and dates. You want to make sure you have strong enforcement tools. So in the pharmaceutical and needle EPR bill, we have $50,000 a day for penalties and the ability for the state to revoke the PRO. That actually didn't happen in the meds and sharps bill, but we just got that in SB 54, the big packaging bill in California. And that is another lesson learned from carpet. Many times they have been found non-compliant, and the state needs to be able to have the tools it needs to take the keys away. And also with that, we need to have contingency plans in case the state has to take over, that they have a roadmap on how to implement the program. Also requiring the PRO, sorry, I didn't spell this out, the Producer Responsibility Organization that acts on behalf of the producers to implement the program. We want it to be a 501c3 for robust transparency. Again, a lesson learned in California with a lot of the pharmaceutical ordinances that were passed prior to the state law. The PRO was formed as a 501c6, which is does not have robust transparency. It's beholden to its shareholders, and the 501c3 has the halo effect, and it's for public benefit. Making sure that there's public education and outreach requirements in the law. And what we learned with the mattress program here in California is they separated out the budget from the plan. So those get approved separately. And obviously the budget and the plan inform each other and have to work cohesively. So we think that they should be approved together. Requiring an advisory committee and making sure that the PRO actually has to listen to their recommendations. Creating eco-modulated fees. So if if a carpet is easier to recycle, then that producer should have to pay less into the system. And making sure that the oversight agency costs are covered. And then protecting the funds. So in something we learned, I think it was with paint, they used the consumer fees to sue the state. And so we want to make sure that we plug that hole for future bills. And then also to have the money in a trust. So this is our guidance to how to get these hard bills passed. First, legislators need data to be able to make the case. So make sure you're collecting that data so you can tell your story. Bring the topic to light. So write op-eds and articles. And then if you're going to pursue local, state, or federal action, you need to find political champions and create a broad coalition of stakeholders and try and find unlikely bedfellows, folks that don't normally agree, but that can come together on this issue. We like to make it as easy as possible for folks to engage. So we create media kits that have social media text and graphics. We provide an advocacy checklist. So that includes template letters, call scripts, and emails. Just make it as easy as possible for folks to engage. And then sometimes it's a multi-year effort, like batteries in California, like pharmaceutical needles were. You have to stick with it to get it done. And we're here to help. We're obviously experts in EPR and passing really hard bills. And so we're here for you. I just wanted to highlight very briefly the importance of truth in labeling, marketing, and advertising. Just here is a battery-powered cannabis vaping device, single use, and they were allowed previously to market it as truly disposable. So obviously consumers are going to think that goes into the trash, which is going to result in more fires. So we passed a bill last year that would say that they cannot market or advertise them as disposable, and that they must tell them that it's hazardous waste and to dispose of them properly. One other thing that we think that really led to the success that we've had is NSAC joined the California Foundation for the Environment and the Economy. And previously they were focusing on energy and water, but they weren't really focusing on waste. So we brought this issue to their attention. We started doing the Recycling Challenge study trips, where they take legislators to other states and countries to see these programs in the flesh, talk to the program operators, the legislators that pass the legislation, and really, you know, they might be told something from lobbyists here in California, we can't do this, but they're doing it in other states and other countries. And so we want them to get the real facts from the folks on the ground. Here you can see Senator Allen on the bottom left. He is very hands-on, got right back there to watch the battery recycling folks, and he's been a huge champion for us in California. And I just want to highlight that NSAC gets really hard things done. Here we are lobbying all day and night to get SB 54. Like I mentioned, that was California's packaging EPR law that got passed last year. And again, Senator Allen, he's amazing. He authored that bill. And here it is, the signing message, and then also the folks that were there. So yeah, that's all I have. This is my contact information. Please reach out. And yeah, like I mentioned, we're always here to help. And thank you again to NAMA. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Oh, well, this got all out of order. 1 second. Okay, Suna, I messed up. If you're able to, I'll pull it up. I'll read your bio, and I'll also at the same time try and get your presentation up. My apologies.
No worries.
Okay, so Suna is an experienced policy analyst and researcher with an environmental engineering background. She is director of policy and programs at the Product Stewardship Institute, where she leads technical research and develops and analyzes product stewardship policy in several product areas, including batteries, carpet, mattresses, household hazardous waste, fluorescent lamps, tires, and mercury thermostats. Her expertise includes an understanding of product stewardship programs in the US and Canada at both the policy level and the operational implementation level. And I am going to be able to get your stuff.
Okay, otherwise I can do it if you.
Okay, you might be quicker. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, you know, I might be quicker if I can find the screen share. Here we go. This one. Share.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Okay, now let's put this here. Move that.
Great, thank you.
Does this look correct, dear?
Yep, that's correct. Thank you so much. And
You have to beep for me to advance.
Yes, I'll prompt you. Thank you both, Jennifer and Jordan, and thanks to NAMA for hosting this series of webinars and providing me an opportunity to speak today, and for and to NSAC for co-hosting today's webinar in particular. So my presentation is going to cover the US battery EPR legislative landscape, sort of from where we are today with laws and bills, and then where we might ideally head, given what we've learned over the years. And some of that will overlap with what Jordan has already laid out, but never hurts to hear it more than once, for sure. So next slide, please.
Oh. Did I skip?
No.
Is that right? Okay, good. I tried to adjust my mouse so I'm not zipping along this time.
No worries. So before I dive in, just a little bit about my organization, for those of you who may not be familiar with us. The Product Stewardship Institute builds capacity for product stewardship and extended producer responsibility, and we have done so for the last over 20 years. We have 47 state environmental agencies and hundreds of local governments as our members. We also have multi-stakeholder partners, over 100 companies, environmental groups, and international governments. And we work on over 25 product areas. Next slide. So again, I know Jordan touched on a little bit about sort of distinguishing EPR from product stewardship, but I wanted to kind of maybe just flesh out a little bit more. An EPR law is a law that extends a producer's financial and management responsibility for its products and packaging, really beyond the manufacturing stage, ideally both upstream to product design and also downstream to post-consumer reuse, recycling, and safe disposal. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, we had a comment. I just want to interject. Somebody said that the slides are too big for the screen. I'm not, is that, do any of you presenters see that on your screens?
I'm not experiencing that issue.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Just wanted to check.
So why EPR for batteries? So while there are voluntary programs to collect and recycle batteries in the US, these programs are not sustainably funded. They also enable free riders, and they lack things that you see in EPR laws, like performance goals, which can drive program performance, and also set targets to help increase collection to reduce the need for example, importing critical minerals. They also lack minimum collection convenience standards, which can increase collection and program accessibility that keeps batteries out of the solid waste stream and helps, this is especially important in the case of battery fires. Unlike voluntary programs, an effective EPR law can also incentivize toxics reduction. I just talked about the upstream design incentives that can be a part of EPR. Effective EPR laws also fund and increase education and outreach. They also can reduce local government costs and provide annual reporting, which provides transparency, accountability, and help monitor the effectiveness of the program. Next slide, please. So in terms of battery management in the US, Call to Recycle is the only industry-funded program in North America that I'm aware of for recycling rechargeables. There's no national industry program for single use, or also known as primary batteries. I'm going to kind of switch back and forth with those terms today. At the federal level, there's the US Battery Management Act of 1996 that removed regulatory barriers to encourage recycling of rechargeable batteries. And also, there are currently battery EPR laws in 9 states and Washington, D.C., the first of which passed in 1991. I'll just note that most of the laws passed before 2000, but more recently, since then, we've had laws passed in California, New York, Vermont, and Washington, D.C. And I'm going to get into a little more detail about some of those laws a little further on in my presentation. So the product scope for these laws varies. To give you an idea, these laws include laws that regulate all rechargeable batteries up to a certain weight limits, some cases 11 pounds or sometimes 25 pounds, depending on the law, and 300 watt hours is also a threshold. Some laws only regulate NiCad, nickel cadmium, mercuric oxide, or sealed lead acid batteries. Some only cover batteries from government and industry and not from households. Some are single-use household batteries up to a certain weight limit, and some are both single-use and rechargeable household and business batteries up to certain weight limits, and those are DC and California. Also, just a note that I know the webinar is focused on lithium-ion batteries, but not most, but not all the existing EPR laws cover those particular type of batteries. But I would say that much of what I'm going to talk about really is more generally applicable to a variety of battery types. Next slide, please. So interest in batteries EPR is growing due to the fire hazards and damage that many of you are aware of, growing use of batteries and expanding range of products, not just laptops, but in newer products, vapes and e-mobility devices, e-bikes, electric scooters, electric vehicles. Existing US EPR laws do not capture or cover e-mobility, electric vehicles, or larger batteries for energy storage currently. Although Call to Recycle teamed up with People for Bikes in 2021 to launch a pilot for voluntary recycling program for electric bike batteries. And I know well, Christy will speak later, but in British Columbia's program, e-mobility batteries are being collected, I believe, as part of that program. I just wanted to mention critical minerals as well. Energy storage and electric vehicles in particular will require a growing source of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite, all of which are majority produced in China. These critical minerals are raw materials that are economically and strategically important to the US and have a supply chain that is vulnerable to disruption, for which there are no easy substitutes. So it's another reason to recycle those materials and use them again. And another driver, most existing laws are limited. As I said, some of them have a fairly narrow scope, only specific types of batteries, only specific sizes of batteries, only from institutions or businesses and not households. And as I noted, many of the laws have been passed before 2000, so they lack current best practices for EPR, such as convenience standards, among others. And we'll talk a little more in detail about that later as well. Next slide, please. So just a quick slide on states that have introduced battery EPR laws in the past 6 years. So 7 states in Washington, DC, which passed a law. California also, which passed their law last year, in Vermont, also introduced an amendment. And in this past 2 legislative sessions, California, New York, and Washington all had active bills to establish new battery EPR programs. I'll talk more later, again, in detail in my presentation. We know also that there's interest in other states in introducing in the current legislative sessions. Next slide, please. Slide 8, I think. There we go. Thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the laws, 3 of the most recent laws in Vermont, DC, and California. And then I'll talk a little bit about recent bills after that. So in Vermont, passed the first US law to cover a broad scope of household primary batteries in 2014. They've achieved the highest per capita state collection rates in the US. In their first year of implementation, they increased collection of primary and rechargeable batteries by over 180%. And they've also achieved approximately collection convenience such that approximately 98% of the population is within 10 miles of a collection site. Some of the lessons learned is, for one, include business batteries. This is a household battery law, but data has shown that almost 9% of the batteries sold in Vermont fall into this category and could be recycled through that the existing program that Call to Recycle runs. There's an increased need for attention to safety with a growing number of lithium batteries, with lithium primary batteries on the market. A disposal ban would help reduce the number of batteries that are still going to the landfill. And another lesson learned based on a 2019 report on battery stewardship done by the Vermont Agency for Natural Resources is to require additional outreach and convenience if program goals are not met. Next slide, please. So while Vermont was the most recent state to implement a battery EPR law, DC's law enacted in 2021 was the first in the nation to include a broad scope of both single use and rechargeables, and also address batteries and battery containing products. PSI provided policy recommendations to DC to improve their bill before enactment. The bill includes convenience standards, addresses equity in collection, it has performance goals of collection rate, recycling efficiency, and public awareness, agency funding, and plan renewal every 4 years as the program matures and lessons are learned. Implementation is expected to begin by September 2023. California has passed the most recent U.S. single and rechargeables law, thanks to California Product Stewardship Council and Californians Against Waste for their hard work in getting this passed. This law is a great step forward, also with strong convenience standards, performance goals, among other things. I won't talk too much about it because I know Doug is going to address it in his presentation as well. And I'll just also mention that the federal bipartisan infrastructure law enacted in 2021 included language to establish a multi-stakeholder task force to develop a federal framework for batteries EPR. That task force is expected to produce the framework and implementation recommendations within a year of convening. At the federal level, also the US EPA did issue a request for information and held meetings to gather information from the public on battery collection and labeling last year. PSI provided information, as did many others across the country, maybe many of you as well. Next slide, please. So just talked about the laws, some of the recent laws. Now I just wanted to talk about bills that were in the last couple of legislative sessions. Building on the passage of DC's law, we saw expanded product scopes in California and Washington EPR bills in the last 2 years, both of which cover single-use and rechargeable batteries. These bills also included eco-modulated fees to encourage environmental design and/or required equity in the collection infrastructure and education as well. Just a couple of highlights from here. So AB 2440 became law. There was an electric vehicle EPR battery bill as well last year in California. Washington, I wanted to highlight also that their bills in 2022, relatively similar bills in this year, introduced this year, also addressed all sizes of batteries, an opportunity to move beyond those of many of the existing laws that have a threshold of 11 pounds for rechargeables and 4.4 pounds for primary, to try to include more of the e-bike batteries and electric vehicle and energy storage batteries as well. So expanding on those features. Next slide, please. There were also recent bills in New York last year and introduced this legislative session. New York has an existing rechargeable law, includes rechargeable batteries up to 25 pounds, which is actually higher than most existing laws. Some of the more recent best practices are not included with this, this existing law. In 2022, there were companion bills introduced to establish a primary batteries program because the rechargeables law already exists, and also a bill to amend the existing rechargeable law to allow cities with more than 1 million to enforce through its own agencies. Similar bills have been introduced this year. I will also note that PSI has been working with the New York Product Stewardship Council on a multi-stakeholder effort to develop a more comprehensive battery EPR bill that includes both single-use and rechargeable, and would replace the rechargeable law for introduction in the 2023 legislative session. So it would cover, intends to cover some of the larger batteries as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as we move towards thinking about what lessons have been learned and how to improve battery EPR legislation, I wanted to mention that in 2022, PSI worked with state and local government and nonprofit representatives from across the country to update and refine our battery EPR model legislation. We worked with representatives from 10 states and Washington, DC as well. And we refined that model based on lessons learned, current key issues, emerging best practices, also in British Columbia and the European Union as well. So we were tracking best practices there as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our model includes the elements shown here, and we, as part of developing that model with our multi-stakeholder group, we developed legislative language for each of these elements in collaboration with that group. Next slide. Thank you. So I'm not going to go through all of those elements that were on the previous slide table, but I wanted to give a few highlights, really seeking a broader product scope, as the technologies are emerging and the growth in batteries and in different products has emerged. There is a need to try to include a broader scope. As I mentioned, many of the existing laws limit to 4.4 pounds and rechargeables to 11 pounds, and also a 300 watt hour threshold is also in many of the laws. So trying to expand that product scope for collection and convenience, having minimum convenience standards, convenience for underserved communities, and covering collection costs, not just transportation and processing of the batteries, but the labor involved in sorting and collecting batteries on site, and provisions to support safe collection as well. Next slide. So just a few other elements, model elements and best practice updates, having performance goals, recycling efficiency. California's law has strict, ambitious recycling efficiency rates for primaries and rechargeables. Also, there's collection rate as performance goal, recycling rate, and public awareness also as a goal. In terms of the model, differential fees based on environmental and financial burden. So these fees would be what producers pay into the stewardship organization based on the environmental and financial burden of their batteries on the program. To kind of incentivize design for recyclability, reduction of toxics, use of post-consumer recycled content. Multi-stakeholder advisory committee provides input into program development and implementation, requires the industry to make program-related decisions with broader stakeholders and stakeholder interests in mind. It also provides greater program transparency and opportunity for local governments to provide ongoing input into the program, which will help better ensure the program works for them and others that serve as collection sites. Equity, especially in education, outreach, and collection convenience to serve underserved and environmental justice communities. Agency funding to oversee and enforce. The agency doesn't have resources to enforce, the program will not be as effective and will allow for free riders. This is a key issue in some existing programs. And plan renewal to improve the stewardship program based on lessons learned and as the program matures and unforeseen changes to the context of the program. Next slide, please. So PSI has, how is PSI helping to advance battery EPR? I mentioned a few of the things that we've done already. We do multi-stakeholder facilitated meetings. We did have a national battery stewardship stakeholder meeting that we facilitated, attended by more than 130 local, state, and federal government officials a few years ago. We developed model legislative language, and we also host battery webinars as well. And last slide, please, Jennifer. Thank you. So, thank you for your time. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Suna. I'm going to stop sharing here. Thank you. Now you can go back and enjoy your vacation, right? She took time off from vacation, people. That's how dedicated she is. Thank you.
Jennifer, you want me to go ahead and introduce Doug?
Yep, right on. Sounds good. Doug, you want to start putting up your presentation, sharing your screen?
So Doug has worked in the solid waste and recycling industry for over 30 years and is the executive director of the California Product Stewardship Council, also known as CPSC, a 501c3 nonprofit that supports producers sharing in the responsibility for managing problem products at their end of life. Doug provides his expertise on numerous boards and commissions, including but not limited to currently serving as vice president of the California Resource Recovery Association Board of Directors and on the Solid Waste Association of North America, California Chapter's Legislative Task Force. In 2022, under his leadership, CPSC co-sponsored and got signed into law AB 2440, which establishes the nation's most comprehensive battery EPR program, and SB 1215, which expands California's existing Electronic Waste Recycling Act to include battery embedded products. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Jennifer and Nama, for hosting this. So I'm going to go ahead and start going through my presentation. As soon as I get my, okay, there we go. Just wanted to cover one, who CPSC is. CPSC is governed by a 14-member board. The four talented folks you see in front of you there are our executive committee, mostly city representatives, but we also have districts, JPAs, counties, etc. on our board. Here's the other 10 individuals who bring a lot to our organization. I really love the diversity of our board and the broad range of experience they bring, because they bring a lot of good ideas, their expertise. It really makes CPSC a much better organization to have the diversity that we have on the board. And then, of course, there's the staff here. I'm one of 6 employees. We have 2 part-timers and then us 4 full-timers. Provided a variety of different roles here at CPSC to continue to get the work done and bring forward good legislation, and also do a lot of grant work for local jurisdictions for hard to manage materials like batteries, propane, single-use propane tanks, solar panels, marine flares. We do a whole host of different product categories that we do cover. So I would be remiss in not thanking our funders, especially our cities, counties, districts, and JPAs. You can see there on the screen the map of the folks that fund us. Love to see more of those green counties, or those white clear counties be green counties, meaning they're actually funding us, and then a lot more of the cities through the red dots. So if you don't see your county highlighted in green, or if you don't see the approximate location of your city as a red dot, please feel free to reach out to CPSC, and we'll help you become a funder of CPSC. And then, of course, we also have our private sector sponsors that help us to do what we do. And they come in a variety of levels, from the platinum, gold, silver, bronze, and green levels. And we certainly appreciate their funding to, again, help us do what we do best. So I stole this map from Suna. I think she knows I like to use her map, use the Product Stewardship Institute's map about all the product stewardship programs across the states, who has how many. So currently we have 13 stewardship or consumer responsibility. So I like to call them their stewardship programs. So they're either EPR or consumer responsibility, and I'll get into that in a minute. But again, we have 13 covering a whole variety of different products. I believe we have the most in the nation right now, so we're proud of that. Here's a list of those various 13 different product stewardship programs, again, whether it be in true EPR or consumer responsibility. The topic we're talking about today for batteries, we used to have the Rechargeable Battery Recycling Act on here that was passed in 2006. That has been replaced by both AB 2440 and SB 1215. We also had the Cell Phone Recovery Act as well. That was passed in 2007. That one was also repealed, or will be repealed, as a result of our 2 bills that we got through last year. So we shrank a couple, we added a couple, so we're still net 13 programs. And then also, as Jordan mentioned earlier, we have a new one on there from last year, which was SB 54 that NSEC and many others led the charge on to get that bill through. So. Okay, just wanted to cover a little bit about what I'm talking about when I say consumer responsibility versus extended producer responsibility, all under a product stewardship spectrum. So one thing that concerns me always here is, and I'm hoping that my colleagues in this area would also agree, is that product stewardship is managing the products at the end of life. Who does that, who funds it are different. They vary from program to program. A lot of times this is called producer responsibility. I think we should get away from that. I don't think we should be calling everything producer responsibility, because certainly if the producers are not funding the recovery of these end of life products, why should they get any kind of credit for it? And so when it comes to like a visible fee where the consumer is actually charged at the point of sale for the product they've just bought, that's going to cover the cost of the legacy products coming in, the producers, if they're not funding it, why should they get any credit at all? Now, on the other end, if they are fully funding it, like our two battery bills, or one of our battery bills is requiring, then absolutely they should get credit, and they should be able to run that program as they see fit, with some guardrails up for making sure the program is going to be effective and it's actually going to do what it's meant to do. So I've been pushing hard now to have us really talk about extended producer responsibility versus consumer responsibility and what happens in the middle. And all of our programs, our 13 programs, are listed in there in some area of the spectrum. And then also on there, you'll see 1 pound refillable propane cylinders. That one actually is would be normally EPR if the folks that made the single-use cylinders were actually responsible for that, but they're not. And so therefore the 1 pound refillables were created by a separate group of individuals pushing for changing out how folks buy their propane and how they use those cylinders. And so don't really want to give credit to the industry that makes 1 pound propane cylinders that are non-refillable, because they don't deserve any of that credit. Okay, so we're here to talk about batteries and embedded battery products. That's what's new. What did we get done last year? I want to give major credits to both Californians Against Waste, as Sooner noted, and also for Rethink Waste, or the South Bayside Waste Management Authority. The picture you see there in front of you is one of the managers at the Rethink Waste facility, where a major fire happened, and I'll talk briefly about that, as Jordan mentioned. They're actually taking a forklift, hard tire forklift, and running, just kind of creeping up onto a lithium-ion battery to show how what the potential of these things really are. And there's a video out there. If you Google it, you'll be able to find this video. It's also, I believe we have it posted on our website at calpse.org, but you can see how this progresses. But the Rethink Waste facility in 2016 suffered a catastrophic fire. A lithium-ion battery containing device got stuck in the disc rings that separate the containers from the fibers, like paper and cardboard. It ignited the paper, and so the paper got carried up on fire and got spread throughout the facility. It cost $8.4 million in damage to the facility, shut it down completely for 3 months. It took a full year to get fully recovered from the damage. They used to pay about $125,000 in annual premiums for their fire insurance, and they had a $5,000 deductible. Now, as Jordan mentioned, they have multiple, and that was one insurance company. They now have 11 different companies insuring them. They pay now over $2 million a year in insurance premiums, and they have a $1.5 million deductible. And if they have one more fire, they will likely not get insured. They'll have to become self-insured, which they're looking into how they could actually do that as a JPA. They're not part of the county or city programs necessarily, so they don't necessarily get to enjoy that group kind of self-insurance. So they're looking into their options should they have another catastrophic fire. They have fires regularly still, even today, but they have put a lot of provisions in place to prevent that catastrophic fire from happening again. But we're always just one more battery away from that inevitability. So and like I think sooner Jennifer mentioned, these are happening across the United States. Facility fires are happening all over. And so it's a huge problem, and it was a big driver for us to move our bills forward. All right. Okay, so as Jordan mentioned, the CFE program, the California Foundation for the Environment, the study trips that happened started in 2019. CPSE was the first co-sponsor with CFE on that trip. Heidi went with one of my staff members, Nate, you saw in one of the pictures earlier, to that first trip. It turned out to be a huge success. NSAC joined on next year as with the next as a co-host for the next trip. Because we found it was so successful that first year, and it was wonderful to have those trips set up. And matter of fact, Jackie Irwin, who you see here under the AB 2440, joined us on one of our trips and became very interested in this as a result of one of those trips. So yeah, I would highly encourage states across the nation, if you are trying to get your educators or your legislators educated on this, great way to do it is to take them and show them other countries where this does and where this happens. And so we've been making multiple trips up to Canada to show how the Canadians are handling their EPR laws and their programs, so we can find the best and brightest of those programs and bring that back to California. You also see Senator Newman on here under SB 1215. The senator, this is not his first rodeo with batteries. So back in 2019, CPSC, Rethink Waste, and Californians Against Waste, we all started AB 1509. I think that was on one of the previous presenter slides. That was just looking at embedded batteries, because those were the huge problems. And obviously Rethink Waste had the biggest stake in there because of the fact that it was their facility that almost burned to the ground. We started that process, unfortunately got shut down in appropriations as a result. But we were about to amend the bill pretty dramatically to include loose batteries, because what we did figure out is that it didn't make a lot of sense to collect just the embeddeds, because the loose batteries are just as much of a problem. And especially now that loose batteries we have lithium metal and lithium ion loose batteries out there that have just as much or more potential for creating fires as the embedded battery products. And so in 2019, we were ready to amend that bill to include those loose batteries. Unfortunately, it died in appropriations before we get through to the next house. And then we had to reintroduce. And so I think I saw on Jordan's slide, or maybe it was Suna's slide, about SB 289. That was Senator Newman's first go at the embedded battery products and loose batteries. And that was done in 2021. We tried to carry that bill forward. Unfortunately, again, it got shut down in appropriations. Kind of seems like every time we brought a battery bill forward, it died in appropriations. We actually started our first bill, CPSC, by itself in 2014 under Assemblymember Doss Williams at the time. And so we've been fighting this fight for a long time. We actually, I heard Heidi remind me that we actually started the battery fight back in 2012. And so it's been a long fought battle, took 10 years, and we finally got where we needed to go. So like Jordan said, this is a long drug out process to get to the final product. So be ready to fight the good fight for more than a year or two. So what does these two new laws do? So under AB 2440, we have this one only applying to loose batteries. And so, but those are all chemistries. So it doesn't matter. We didn't want to just focus on alkaline or nickel cadmium or lithium ion or lithium metal. We wanted to make sure that it was covering all of those various batteries if they're loose. So it is a true EPR program. We are the producers of the batteries. So your Energizers, your Duracells, your other producers out there are on the hook to fund and run this program. They have to provide plans, stewardship plans to Cal Recycle and to DTSC, who will be reviewing those. We are the first statewide program to have for all loose batteries to have true EPR, and we followed right behind District of Columbia. So this was huge to get this in, get a statewide program going. One of the things we wanted to focus on, we wanted to make sure there was convenience. And so there, as you saw in some of the earlier slides, there's metrics about recycling rates and convenience, et cetera. We wanted to make sure there was a significant convenience standard on here. So one of the things we put in there is we said that there will be one location for every 10,000 people. And then a minimum of 10 per county. So, and we have 58 counties in California. And so that was going to guarantee certainly about 580 locations. The difference is, though, we wanted to give some credit to the rural counties who have much smaller populations. So we actually have we have rural exemptions to go down to lower numbers. So our lowest tier for minimum collection sites in a county is 3, and that's for populations under 15,000. And we elevate from there up to 100,000. Anything over 100,000, you're at the minimum of 10. We also said that so just on the population alone, looking at the population of the state, there's going to be more than 3,000 collection locations throughout the state that have to be reasonably geographically spread. That will be approved by Cal Recycle, that convenience. Then also on top of that, we put into this bill that the retailers have a stake in this. They have to partake in this too. And so what we said is, if you're a retailer with 5 or more locations in California, so if you're a Safeway and you sell batteries at most of your stores, if you're a CVS, if you're an AMPM, because the AMPM mini marts are also have 5 or more locations, you have to participate as a collection location. And so that will be ferreted out more in the regulations process that's to follow. But with this additional requirement for retailers, we actually now anticipate there will be more than 5,000 collection locations in California. This should make it extremely convenient for the consumers to take these old batteries back, these loose batteries back, and put them into whatever type of container system the product stewardship organization or organizations develop through their plans and what they plan to implement as they put out this program. Another thing we required that the stewardship organization reimburse the local governments, because we know for a fact that the batteries are going to continue to go into HHW facilities, and local governments are the ones that are on the hook to fund the HHW facilities. So we want to make sure that the costs were covered for the local governments. So in that requirement, they have to provide the necessary training, that they, being the stewardship organization, has to provide cost reimbursement for necessary training, protective equipment, collection, lab packing materials, transportation, and recycling of the batteries. So on 1215, SB 1215, we wanted to, this one applies to battery embedded products. And so how we define this, we wrestled with this for a while, and we finally figured out what was the best way to cover this. Is we wanted to make sure that the batteries could not be removed with common household tools, is the language we ultimately settled on. Does that mean if you take a hammer to a cell phone and you beat the battery out of it, is it now a loose battery product? No. We're going to have some reality in here. We're going to need to ferret that out during the regulations process to make sure that people aren't beating the batteries out with a hammer. Not that I think anybody would actually do that, but you just never know. If they think that maybe they can recycle their battery easier if it comes out of that embedded battery product, then maybe they'll want to do that. But the idea is that if you have a screwdriver and a little panel and you can take the panel off and get the batteries out, that's a removable battery. Therefore, those fall into AB 2440. The batteries do, the product doesn't. But if you have to basically think of it this way, if you have a device in your household, and they're all over your household now, if you have to plug it in to charge it back up, it's going to be in under 1215. It'll apply under 1215. This bill actually expanded our e-waste program that was passed back in 2003, SB 20, later amended in 2004 by SB 40, SB 50, excuse me, that established the covered electronic waste program. It was the visible fee established to be charged at the check stand. It only applied to digital display devices for all these years. It did not apply to printers, fax machines, any of the other peripherals. It was only on TVs and monitors. DTSC actually has a role in this program as well, under where they actually define or decide what is a covered electronic device. And then if it is a covered electronic device, then it applies to the CEW program that CalRecycle operates and distributes the money and regulates that. One of the other things we wanted to do was make sure that the recovery of these embedded devices utilize the existing e-waste infrastructure and processing infrastructure out there already. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have a great, robust system out there that's already collecting a lot of these things, so it makes a lot of sense to bring those forward. So we did not necessarily have any kind of a collection convenience standard for retailers on this end. Although a lot of them are already taking these things back themselves, at least a lot of the products they tend to sell. But we didn't want to require this because we want to make sure that the e-waste is being properly managed under an existing program that is successful. Okay, so some other details I wanted to cover just on both the bills. So back to 2440. As I mentioned earlier, it repeals the Rechargeable Battery Act from 2006. It repeals the Cell Phone Recycling Act from 2004. Excuse me, I think I said 2007 on that one. It does enact the Responsible Battery Recycling Act. It's going to require CalRecycle to work with DTSC as they adopt the regulations, and they cannot adopt the regulations any earlier than April 1, 2025. That's going to give time for the development of the regulations and also for the battery industry to start to react to this. The producers must submit their plan within 12 months once those regulations are adopted. So it could be as early as April 1, 2026 that they'll have to have submitted a plan. The producers will have to have submitted a plan within 24 months of the adopted regulations. And the reason we put this one in here, limiting them to no more than 2 years from the adoption of the regulations, is we didn't want this to drag out. We didn't want back and forth going on with the stewardship plan and revisions and all that. We want to make sure you are on the hook to get this thing going, this plan going within 24 months of the adopted regulations. So that was key to make sure that there was no foot dragging going on. Under SB 1215, we defined what was a covered battery embedded product. And I mentioned already about the common household tools. One of the other things we looked at is we had to deal with medical devices. And one of the learning curves I had was I had no clue that there were certain devices in our homes that are considered medical devices. How about a battery operated toothbrush? That is actually a class 1 medical device, and therefore would have been exempt if we would have just given a broad exemption for all medical devices, class 1 through 3. Class 2 and 3 are automatically going to be exempted from this program. Those are typically mostly used in the medical and healthcare settings. So what we wanted to deal with under the class 1 medical devices, we didn't want simple devices within our homes to be exempted from this. We said, okay, if the class 1 device is predominantly used in the healthcare setting, or if it is prescribed by your doctor, then it's out. It's not part of the program, but otherwise it's in. And so this makes sure that those devices like those, like the Sonicares, for example, which have an embedded battery in them, they are part of this program, and then they will get properly taken care of. A few other exclusions we had in there is we didn't want to touch energy solar system storage yet, because that is a work in progress at a much higher level. Interestingly enough, we captured cannabis vaping devices in here. If they've got an embedded battery in them, they are in. But if it's a nicotine type device, so your vaping devices with cigarette type stuff, those are not. And the reason we did that is because of the P listed hazardous waste that's contained within the pods, that nicotine that's in there. The e-waste facilities up and down the state of California cannot take those right now. It takes special permitting to get those processed at an e-waste facility. And so there's nobody that's able to do that. And so that's just another battle for another day to figure out how we're going to get vaping devices. We know that they're a huge issue for schools, school districts. They're taking those away from the kids. And then what do they do with them? They're expensive to get rid of. And so we will hopefully be able to tackle that at a future date and under a different bill. I know that NSAC, Heidi and Jordan tried to do that last session under AB 1690 with Assembly Member Luz Rivas, but that bill got shot down, unfortunately. So hopefully it'll come back at some point in the future, and we'll start to take care of these nicotine vaping devices. The other thing we wanted to do is make sure that the scooters, skateboards, hoverboards, all those things were covered under this, or at least captured under this, because most of them don't have removable batteries in them. They are embedded in the product. And the other thing that always came up was, what about e-bikes? How do we deal with e-bikes? And since e-bikes come in a variety of sizes and shapes, et cetera, it was a little bit more difficult to define what that was. And so we just took the federal highway regulation for what is considered a device that will propel a person along the highway. What would be a vehicle? What defines a vehicle? And so if under the federal guidelines, if the device is meant to only carry one person or property along a highway, it's not considered a vehicle. And so that's why the e-bikes can use the bike lanes, et cetera. And it's because they are not considered like a motorcycle. If you have an electric motorcycle that can carry two people, that is considered a vehicle. It must be licensed, et cetera. So that was the breaking point we had for figuring out how to deal with e-bikes. And so I would highly recommend you look into, if you're considering this, look into the federal regulations for definition of vehicle, and that might help you. All right, other details. So for 1215, the visible consumer fees, they're going to start on January 1 of 2026. It will be a single fee initially until the state has more information. So the state or Cal Recycle may be able to establish multiple levels of fees starting in January 1 of 2028. Currently, under our covered electronic waste program here in California, our visible fee for the monitors and TVs is, I believe it's $4, $5, and $6, depending on the screen size. So we should see a variety of fees at a later date, obviously after January 1 of 2028, for the variety of different electronic products that are out there and what their costs are going to be to process those different devices. Cal Recycle is going to adopt the regulations effective on January 1 of 2025 for the new payment system for this. So this is all again under the e-waste program. So they will start to pay for that. So they'll start to collect the money on January 1 of 2028 or 2025. Or excuse me, they'll establish a new payment system and they'll start paying April 1 of 2026. So you can see that there's a year and a half, almost a year and 3 months lag there. But we have to wait for the fees to start to be collected on January 1 of 2026. And then there's a 3-month period before claims will start to be paid to the processors for those embedded battery products that they are now processing. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I see there are a couple questions. I don't know if you want me to answer them.
Yeah,
Jennifer.
you could, I think, yeah, you could go ahead. Would you like me to read? I'll read them. What
Sure.
kind of training and support is done for the collection locations? Do they know where they need to take all the batteries and how often to take?
So so that would be under 2440, and we weren't very specific on exactly what training they needed to have, because we need the product stewardship organization to kind of figure that out. They need to comply with the laws, but we didn't want a program propping up without adequate training, because we are talking about batteries. We're talking about lithium batteries especially. And so we wanted to make sure that the facilities, the collection locations got what they needed in order to do the proper collection, but also and the training they needed. But we don't want to be too prescriptive, because here's one of the things we found in passing these kind of laws here in the state. If we are not prescriptive enough, then it's left to interpretation, and there can be all kinds of problems that come as a result of not being prescriptive enough. If we're too prescriptive, what happens is certainly during the regulation process, we find that Cal Recycle, for example, will have their hands tied. they'll tell us, well, we can't do that. We don't have the statutory authority to do that, or we're limited by the statute. And so we try to do that balance. And this is always a work in progress. Every new bill, we learn something new from the previous programs. As Jordan mentioned, we've learned a lot from the various programs that have been done throughout time here in California. And so we have to be very careful about how prescriptive we are. And so that's why we wanted to at least put in there, you guys need to provide this. Now, we may ferret out some of this in regulation and be a little more prescriptive there. Regulations are a lot easier to change than legislation. And so we tend to leave a lot more of this to regulations. And then the other part of that question, do they know where they need to take the batteries and how often? So that'll be up to the product stewardship organization. Product stewardship organization has to set up this collection network. They have to contract with the various entities that will either do milk run collection, or if there's some kind of shipping back, kind of like the call to recycle program and the big green box program, where you put all those batteries in a box and then you close it up, put the shipping label on it, then it's picked up by a common carrier. That might be the choice they make. We didn't want to dictate to them they must do some kind of a bucket brigade program or do the call to recycle or big green box type of program. We want to leave that up to the stewardship organization, because as I mentioned early on, when it's producer funded, we really want them to control their destiny here, and we just want to have all the guardrails in place to make sure they do a good job of creating a program that actually is going to work and do what it was intended to do. Questions for, okay, let's see. Does AB 2440 establish alternative participation requirements on the online retailers? So the online retailers are on the hook. So this is interesting. Okay, we had to deal with this with the brick and mortar, and this is why we wanted to have some kind of incentive. We actually have a provision in the law that says that the stewardship organization will try to incentivize the collection locations. And the reason being is we wanted to make sure that the online retailers were captured in some way. Now they are. So the online retailers are subject to this. So whether or not it's sold physically here or sold online, the stewardship organization will be requiring those online sellers to be part of the program when they're selling batteries and shipping them. So they are stuck as part of the program. I don't know if we'll have mail back in there. That'll be up to the stewardship organization to figure that out. That can be a little risky in itself, shipping back, especially the lithium metal and lithium ion loose batteries. That could be a potential problem. So we'll have to see how that fares out in the regulations. But certainly the online sellers, we didn't want them to be free riders. They have to be part of the program. They do have to register with the stewardship organization and be part of that. So I hope that helps to answer that question on the brick and mortar question. What is taken into consideration to set the battery recycling fee? Do the collectors get paid? Absolutely. Okay, so good question from Steve. Steve, so in California, under our CEW program, we have the collectors are actually paid. I think it's now 26 cents per pound. It might be a little bit more than that, and that comes out of the program. So the e-waste processors, the treatment facilities, they actually have to take part of what they receive from CalRecycle under the program and give that to the collectors, which covers the cost of collecting these materials. So there is absolutely some money coming back to the collectors for the battery. What is taken into consideration for setting the battery recycling fee? It's going to be all the costs. And so CalRecycle has been doing this under the CEW program since early on, since 2004. They have been at fee, that three-tier fee I talked about earlier. I think it's the $4, $5, and $6 now. It's been as high as $20 on the highest end for the biggest monitors, and it's been down as low as $5. So so CalRecycle has a lot of processes they do to make sure that what they're collecting is adequate to cover the costs of the products that are being processed at the time. So there won't be too much difference here. CalRecycle will be spending some time here trying to figure out what that initial fee should be come out the gate, and then we'll be adjusting that regularly. So they can adjust that first fee almost annually. When it goes to the multiple fees, then they can start to diversify and figure out what products are more complicated, more costly to recycle, and therefore increase that visible fee at the check stand. But that will be a consumer responsibility program. 1215 AB 2440 is actually a true EPR program. So George, good question on George Kirshner. Scooters, skateboards, e-bikes are only covered under SB 1215 if the battery is not easily removable, correct? That is correct. So they are part of 1215. If the battery comes out, depending on the size, if it's not over 11 pounds, not over 300 kilowatt hours,
It will be.
But if it's loose, it would be part of that program. It would be part of the 2440 program. If it can't be taken out with common household tools, then it's part of 1215. Okay, go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry.
No, I just added in that all of the e-bikes are way larger than 300 watt hours.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So
and it's the high-end $12,000 ones that have them embedded in the stem, so the bike still looks cool. The majority you can pull off.
There was a question about spilled battery acid. Good question. Not sure, Avery, on that one, exactly how that will be handled. I don't know if I've seen an embedded battery product with battery acid oozing out of it, but that certainly does happen. We've seen that with the loose batteries where they come in with a bunch of battery acid all over them. So that's possible. That's something we'll probably have to look at for regulations. Thank you for asking that question. Okay, do you think the producer funded organization, as required 501c3, will stifle competition, promote competition in the PRO space? So we have found that the 501c3 requirement has no bearing. And we see this specifically in SB 212 that CPSC passed in 2018, the pharmaceutical and sharps legislation, where we did require a 501c3. We have two pharmaceutical PROs. We have Med Project that was pretty well established with the 9 counties that had ordinances in California before the passage of SB 212. And then we also have Inmar Intelligence that started the Drug Take Back Foundation. They were also running a program here in California, so they're side by side. And then on the Sharp side, we have both Med Project, Inmar, and also Ultimed, who is its own producer, and they're running their own stewardship program for their own product. And so we don't see the 501c3 as a issue for competition. Matter of fact, if anything, we love the 501c3. CPSC is a 501c3 because it's highly transparent. A 501c3 is for public benefit only. And so it's highly transparent, and it guarantees that we can get these programs running and make sure they're running appropriately.
Say, Doug, I think we'll move on. It looks like
absolutely.
We might have a question or two. Oh, George wants a little answer. So one more question. There's no battery size limits in SB 1215, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, so that was an interesting thing that came up recently at the Used Oil Household Hazardous Waste Conference. Anna Maria Stoyan is in charge of the e-waste program at CalRecycle. And she's not totally certain that EV batteries won't be intended in there. I believe we did cover that under the exclusion for electric or for vehicles. So we think it's okay, but it may come out that even EV batteries might be part of that program. So we're gonna have to figure that out in the regulation process.
Thank you, Doug.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll go on with our final speaker, and then we will still have some question and answer time. We wanted to run this one till 3 o'clock. So if you have questions, you can stay tuned. And Jordan, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So Christy McMillan is a senior policy analyst with the British Columbia Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. In her work with the Extended Producer Responsibility section, Christy was a file lead for several producer programs covering thousands of producers and products. She is currently leading the consultation process and policy analysis to regulate more products this year, including mattresses, compressed canisters, medical sharps, and more batteries. Thank you, Christy.
Hi. So I want to just thank Jennifer for inviting me to speak today, and I've certainly learned a lot. I also understand that our legislation and regulatory process is different here, so I've tried to do the best that I can to explain how our programs work and a little bit of the difference, just to give a bit of an idea, some uh, different thoughts and processes that go into it that might um, give you an understanding of some of the impacts when writing legislation and regulations. Um, so, like Jordan said, I'm a senior policy analyst with the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. We usually have around 11 staff that work across 3 sections in extended producer responsibility. One of our sections oversees 20 of our existing EPR programs. These range from residential packaging and paper, beverage containers, medications, paint, used oil, tires, electronics, and obviously batteries. The section that I work in, we're a team that looks after circular economy, our plastic action initiatives to reduce single-use plastic in the environment. And part of this is a future policy for extended producer responsibility and how that all works together. On this team, it's just myself and I have an economist joining me to work on how to explain consumer affordability and some of the nuances around the pricing for extended producer responsibility, and just a shift in costs that the recycling continues to be paid, but we shift it. And we also have a compliance team. I think it's one part-time person that works on free rider producers, looking at annual port submissions and that sort of work. To put our jurisdiction into perspective, BC has a population of around 5 million people. It's larger than California. And outside of Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, we service more rural and remote communities. We have large parts of the province that are long transportation networks, and some of our communities are accessible only by boat. I'd also like to begin today by respectfully acknowledging the Algonquin-speaking people on whose territory I'm giving this presentation from, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and the Saanich people whose historical relationship with the land continues today. All right, so batteries were first regulated in 2009, along with a limited amount of electronics. And by 2012, over a phased approach, most single-use and rechargeable batteries embedded in equipment and devices, regardless of whether they were generated by households or commercial businesses, were regulated. I just wanted to share a little bit about how our regulatory wording works. Our definition for batteries for electronics products is batteries that could be used in a listed electronic or electrical product, including primary batteries and rechargeable batteries. So that means that all of our large list of electronic products, if a battery could be used in them, it's sold standalone, so not just replacement, but primary batteries are captured. And we also regulate all lead acid batteries weighing more than 2 kilograms or 4.5 pounds. Sealed lead acid batteries are captured in the electronic program, so ride-on toys, that sort of thing. Our categories for electronics are broad. Some examples include computers, cell phones, toys, electronic toothbrushes, flashlights. We have appliances, tools, exercise and outdoor power equipment. Under our sporting equipment, we have e-bikes, and for the outdoor power equipment, it goes all the way up to the size of a ride-on lawnmower. And I think we sold 6 ride-on lawnmowers with lithium-ion batteries last year. And again, it's all batteries regardless of who generates them and who returns them. So we've found that EPR, extended producer responsibility, creates safer management practices and higher recycling rates. It also reduces municipal and Indigenous government waste management costs. It supports the recycling industry, and it really does create more jobs than waste. Because of this, we've received ongoing feedback that more products should be managed through producer responsibility. In response, we published a EPR 5-year action plan from 2021 to 2026. Later this year, we will be adding mattresses, more moderately hazardous products. This is going to be almost all compressed canisters, propane tanks, aerosols, bear sprays, medical sharps, and then of course more batteries. Given the rapid adoption of batteries and new products and applications, we have gaps in coverage for products that we couldn't imagine would exist in 2012. You know, a good example is the e-cigarettes and vapes. So to address this, we're going to be expanding our regulation to include all batteries. We're literally looking at just regulating the words all batteries with a couple exemptions. Although some in these applications would be limited to probably military and aviation or aeronautical equipment. So to better illustrate what I'm talking about, I've broken this down into an all battery approach into 3 categories. This makes it easier to understand. Products and devices that include batteries. These are shoes, clothing, pet collars, you know, your running jacket that warms up, e-cigarettes, vapes. Right now we capture drones that are more along the consumer line, but the big sort of commercial drones we don't. So basically all electronics that have batteries will be captured. We're also looking at batteries that are used in storage systems, such as residential battery storage and portable power stations. These are the big batteries that you can buy from Home Depot or Costco, and they're the ones that power an RV or work sites. And we're also looking at transportation batteries, such as hybrid and electric batteries, golf carts, and ATVs. So I just wanted to share a little bit about how our EPR approach works, because I know that it's different than a lot of states' approaches and different provinces. I've received lots of help from SUNA and in particular Cal Recycle and Mattresses, and I'm learning the differences between all the jurisdictions. In Canada, most of the provinces and territories have EPR or they're working to implement it. And while the outcomes are similar, our regulations and implementation are unique to each region and very different. In BC, the regulatory requirements for EPR are outlined in a recycling regulation with similar requirements for all producers. We add new packaging and products by amending the list of attached schedules. So basically in 2003, even though I'm doing a lot of policy analysis and a lot of work, we're literally just going to write out the names of the products we're going to add to a recycling regulation. And just imagine stapling a page onto the back of the regulation and those will be added. We use a cascading definition of a producer. We start with the manufacturer, followed by the brand owner, then the importer, distributor, or retailer. And this also includes online sales. When we wrote online sales into a regulation, we weren't incredibly clear about it. And some of the bigger marketplace facilitators, Walmart, Home Depot, places like that, Amazon, they participate sometimes and other times maybe don't want to participate so clearly. So we're also rewriting our legislation to much clearer reflect that marketplace facilitators are online sellers if they're collecting the tax. Producers must have a ministry-approved EPR plan to sell or use listed products in BC, and typically producers have 1 to 2 years to develop and submit their plans to the ministry for review. Producers are responsible for implementing, operating, and fully funding their EPR programs. They will have several business decisions to make, including whether to operate an EPR program on their own or with others. Historically, rather than developing an EPR plan individually, most producers form or hire existing nonprofit agencies that help them. These agencies sign up producers, collect eco fees, and support financial oversight, and are responsible for the recycling program's operations. Producers decide if they want to pass along the cost of the recycling program to consumers, which may or may not include charging a visible recycling fee, or what we refer to as an eco fee. So I found it interesting when Doug was talking about consumer and EPR. We just call it sort of visible eco fee or hidden eco fee, and we allow each producer to decide what they want to do. Even for the same products, we'll see some retailers charging a visible fee for competitive advantage, other ones embed it. Maybe they don't have the point of sale software, or for other reasons, they've just decided to pass it along. So government doesn't set eco fees. We stay out of that type of business and administrative decision making. However, we do maintain oversight by requiring programs that charge a visible eco fee to submit audited financial statements to the ministry annually, and they're completed by professional chartered accountants. So I just wanted to give you a few examples in Canadian dollars what our eco fees are. Call to Recycle manages our single-use battery program. They charge 5 cents per battery, so a pack of 4 batteries would be 20 cents. It's 50 cents eco fee for a laptop, and that includes their management of their embedded batteries. It's $8 for a lawnmower, that again includes the lithium ion battery, and $15 for an e-bike. The eco fees must cover the full cost of the whole program. They also must be managed as a nonprofit, and just if a local government decides to participate in a collection of a program, they must be paid like a private contractor would. So either a private business as a depot is contracted to collect, or local governments are, but it's a business to business relationship. And finally, EPR programs must also submit independent verification that the program is meeting its environmental and safety management commitments. All right, I wanted to set the stage a little bit and highlight why EPR for batteries is challenging, but why we also think it's important. So as probably everyone knows here, more and more products are on the market today contain batteries, many of which are embedded inside electronic devices, which makes it extremely challenging to know how many or what kind of batteries are sold into a jurisdiction. So for an example, I've used this before, Amazon brings in, a purple plastic toy into the province, or it may have 2, 3, 4 batteries. We don't know. Again, we're seeing coffee pots, all kinds of things that would traditionally wouldn't have batteries, sometimes might have 2 embedded batteries. So just a little bit around how challenging this is for the operation. So as a result, our approach is to assign a responsible producer is by the product type, or what we usually refer to as the primary function of the product, and not necessarily by battery type. So this has also led to multiple agencies operating separate province-wide EPR programs for different electronics and batteries. We find this allows for more individualized programs, but does increase our administrative work. I'll go over the concept of product's primary function just a little bit more in a couple slides. But today I just wanted to point out that we have 6 programs that manage electronics and electrical products that have batteries in them, and two programs that manage batteries. One solely does lead acid batteries for vehicles, and Call to Recycle does all the other batteries. So standalone batteries are collected in battery collection boxes, probably very similar to the United States, and by Call to Recycle in their boxes. And currently approximately 96% of all British Columbians live within 15 kilometers or under 10 miles of a public collection facility. And that's actually for electronics as well. Battery containing electronics are collected at recycling depots, at participating retailers, and at one-day collection events. Additionally, EPR agencies supplement the collection system by offering a direct pickup option for large volume generators. So that could be anything from a school or an institution that has lots of laptops to we're seeing more and more of the touring bike companies that are their e-bikes are coming to the end of life, and they might need a large volume pickup. So an important safeguard is all batteries collected in BC, except for automotive lead acid batteries, are processed through R2 certified recycling facilities. The R2 standard outlines responsible recycling practice, which covers environmental, worker health and safety, and data security practices. All right, so now that our EPR programs are fully implemented, I can share some of the concepts that have helped us. First, a province-wide recycling approach using consistent material lists improves consumer awareness and provides greater economies of scale for EPR programs. This in turn supports species recycling workers and businesses with consistent funding for the collection and responsible management of all regulated products. We often regulate by looking at what is showing up at municipal sites and by how to reduce consumer, retailer, and depot confusion, not simply by environmental impacts. So if I stand in front of a shelf somewhere, or I often send staff that are helping me online shopping, we want to know how people are selling things, because that's usually a good way to understand how consumers think of things. And a depot operator is usually a low barrier job. And we want to make sure that if something shows up at a depot, people really understand that they can take it and that it's acceptable, and there isn't ultimately maybe some pushback a little bit too on not taking it. So look, going forward, that's part of what we look at as much as the environmental impacts. As I mentioned earlier, we also regulate based on a product's primary function. This means that the producer associated with that product does, for what the product does, is responsible for managing all components that are sold with the product. So for example, a singing birthday card, it's a paper product under a packaging category, but it has a battery inside it. Its primary function is a card. It's not necessarily it's not sold as a battery. So it's the paper producer's responsibility to manage all components rather than going to the battery manufacturer separately. This may seem obvious, but as the line between different product categories becomes more blurred with the emergence of batteries and more packaging and products, this approach makes it clear and more consistent with respect to who is ultimately responsible for the collection and management of batteries. We've also learned some lessons along the way. We have found that recovery or collection recovery rate based targets for electronics can be a challenge. I know policymakers and regulators really like recovery rates, and I completely understand why, as they can be extremely valuable metric to assess program performance. However, when it comes to programs that manage a broad list of electronics with batteries embedded in them, it's extremely challenging to calculate an accurate recovery rate. As I mentioned, it's very difficult to know how many batteries are sold or inside every device, which is obviously a key piece of information for calculating the total amount that is collected for recycling in comparison to the total amount that's sold in the province. For that reason, the EPR agencies that manage battery containing electronics demonstrate performance through a suite of other indicators. The two that we focus greatly on are improving convenience and increasing consumer awareness. The EPR agencies also help fund landfill waste composition studies. Around the province, they rotate which ones they participate in to know what's actually going into the landfills, and almost 70% of the population in British Columbia is covered with landfill bans for EPR products. Conversely, the EPR program for standalone batteries does report a recovery rate. However, the challenge we're facing is that to date, it's lower than we'd like to see it. In 2021, it was 33%, a fair bit lower than the European Union's 45% target. And due to commodity values, lead acid batteries always meet their 100% recovery target. It's also should be noted that starting this year, Call to Recycle is adjusting their calculation method to better address the variability in battery lifespan and availability for collection. So maybe next year we'll see some interesting changes in their annual report. Lastly, as I've mentioned previously, we need a comprehensive regulatory definition for batteries that will stay relevant over time. I sort of call this the triage approach. As a new product comes onto the market, sometimes, you know, in a fad, it can literally be a month or two, and we're seeing them everywhere. We need to have batteries in our regulation so we can address it incredibly fast. All right, this is just a quick graph on our trends and the challenges of demonstrating EPR program performance and tracking embedded batteries. The graph represents the total annual collection of electronic equipment and standalone batteries between 2011 to 2021. We've seen an overall trend of increasing collection for standalone batteries roughly 135%. However, when you look at the curve for electronics collection, you'll see that the weight-based collection is going down while the actual program performance is doing much better. You know, and if you're old enough to remember, like Walkmans or MP3 players, digital cameras, all of these things are being replaced by the single smartphone, and we're really seeing a drop off in the variety of larger weight-based products that are affecting these rates. All right, and just one more challenge. And it's one of the biggest ones that we have is new lithium ion batteries. They're being put in our curbside recycling. So like Doug said, we've had numerous recycling trucks that are collecting paper and packaging catch on fire. We're seeing lots of garbage fires and garbage trucks, and we're also having our landfills, the best of their ability, track even like a puff of smoke and trying to figure out what's causing it, whether it's an iPad or a cell phone, or sometimes it's also pool chemicals. Trying to figure out how the behavior is, and we realized that the electronics with embedded batteries, there's a much better behavior than there is with some of the primary little tiny batteries that fit easily in a black garbage bag. Based on the most recent consumer surveys, 85 to 89% of those surveyed are aware that there's a recycling program for electronics and batteries and know where to take them. However, this doesn't necessarily correlate with the actual consumer behavior. As I was saying, almost all of our bottle depots, you take a beverage container back for a deposit, they take batteries. And so I take my bottles, I take my light bulbs, I take my batteries, but we're just not seeing that people sort of understand this. And we don't know if it's the maturity of the bottle program or the deposit, but we're just really trying to get that point across. So as the programs become more mature, we're asking them to do more education and outreach. And here I provided a picture of Call to Recycle's bus wrap, talking about recycle your batteries. And almost all the EPR programs here use the bus system to promote their programs and what to do with the products. And there we go, we've come to the end. So I just want to thank you for participating today, and I'll let Jordan and Jennifer continue from here. But if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to email me or go to their website for more information.
It looks like you do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
And Jennifer,
yep,
if I'm take over if you want to. Do the BC regs establish any sort of convenience requirement or minimum amount of collection services that PROs are required to meet?
So a regulation doesn't, but what EPR agency needs to do is submit a plan to our ministry, and our statutory decision maker approves them every 5 years, and that plan has to be consulted on. So each individual plan would have a convenience factor, and they're different depending on whether they're more remote, rural, indigenous communities. Sometimes have different service needs that they want. But usually every community over 4,000 people has to have a permanent facility. And then we have another gradient at 30,000 and above, where we see, I'm trying to think, some of the groups, especially some of the electronic groups, are up to 96% of the population. Yeah, within a permanent facility, closer to the 15 kilometers. We also know that in our urban areas, because of the retailer take back and office take back, it's much higher than that. So they do need to reach targets. They do need to propose it, and our local governments are very vocal at saying if they don't think the convenience standard is high enough, that they won't have to deal with it. So that's how we often set it.
Very neat. A couple more. Does BC
Yep.
use curbside battery collection? And the second is, and do you provide any exemptions for battery powered medical devices?
So we do provide exemptions for medical devices if they've been in someone's body or they're contaminated with bodily fluids. Those are the only exemptions that we include. And we're looking at exempting MRI machines just because I think there's only 7 brought into the province a year, and they're managed uh, by reverse logistics. But no, other than that, there isn't really any exemptions there. And sorry, what was the other part of that?
Does BC
Yeah.
use curbside battery collection?
Right. We don't. It was used in Ontario. And anecdotally, I haven't found more about this. When the pilot projects started, people really get going on the way they want to do stuff, and then the group that was doing it decided that it wasn't working. It was getting a little bit more dangerous to use curbside recycling. Some of the bins were spilling on the sidewalk, and I think that they just decided to do more of a take back system with the electronics. So we asked some of our agencies that proposed it here to just pause, because we don't want to see a system put in place that never stops. So we wanted to make sure that if they were going to do it here, instead of running a pilot, that it was sort of really well thought out and looked at other jurisdictions. And then we actually worked with them and suggesting that maybe we don't want that. And I don't know. I'm not in the solid waste industry, but I hear about what shows up with batteries. The ammunition, the sharps, the batteries. We've just decided get all of that out of curbside to the best of our ability. It's more benign. It's plastic and it's paper and it's metal and it's glass, and even glass doesn't go on our curbside. Glass goes to the depot, so it doesn't contaminate the paper stream. So no, we to this point we've sort of paused and hesitated on doing curbside.
Thank you. We've 3 more, so if we can answer them all. How much collaboration or communication is shared between upstream producers and downstream disposal entities to influence product design and potentially develop a comprehensive and relevant definition for batteries? If none, what current action is being taken to reconcile this disconnect?
So I think that's a great question. I think what you're getting at is a little bit about the design for the environment. Is our extended producer responsibility getting at better design? I could use electric vehicles as a good example. They need to be easier to disassemble, easier to get at. So there's a lot, iPads, all kinds of electronics are a bit challenging. And we would really love to feel that extended producer responsibility gets a little bit at that design for the environment, but we are a very tiny jurisdiction, and we really ride on the coattails of California, the European Union, and ultimately we work a lot with our Retail Council of Canada, some of the leading retailers, Costco, Best Buy, a lot of other ones. And if they make a change, that it usually doesn't have to do with British Columbia. It's because of other factors like the Ellen McCarthy Foundation or the Canadian Plastic Pact or something like that. So I'd love to say yes, but I don't think we're seeing a huge influence. There was some examples definitely in our packaging program where things became more recyclable and easier to deal with because of it. But does that answer the question? I wasn't quite sure about the disconnect part.
Well, I think it's a lot more complicated with batteries. I think you're right. I mean, packaging, you can push some things, but you're talking about if it's embedded the entire design of the product. So it's tricky.
The one thing I would say is that because the EPR programs fully fund and operate the programs, what Doug was talking about is liability is a big issue. We don't even talk about training. We don't talk about protocols, a lot of that under a regulation, but they happen. And so that's what we're seeing more of, is the risk-based liability is not necessarily absolved, when they're under extended producer responsibility, where if they're just deemed as a waste, there is more of a disconnect. So I think we're seeing more movement in trying to get the critical metals back or the plastics back, partly because of the recycled content, but largely that liability and safety is really driving it. That's how all of our processors became so good at what they do. it was ultimately the producers themselves who never want their name associated with a problem at a processor. And that's where that connection really works, is we have incredible processors operating at very phenomenal levels. And that's actually being driven because the reputation of these companies is a little bit more important to them for the liability than even what we can do. And if that makes sense a little bit.
I think that's interesting because a lot of these producer responsibility laws don't cover anything other than financial liability. And they like to get deep into your operations sometimes, and they have more liability than they think. And if they prescribe the downstream facilities that you must use, and if those fail, they should be responsible for that. But I don't really see that addressed in any legislation. I've always been curious about it because we seem to just stick to financial liabilities.
Jennifer,
Whoa,
maybe
might
I'll
have
jump in here.
influenced Doug to reply.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in here real quick. So that's been brought up on numerous occasions here in California as well. Gee, why don't we
Right.
make the producers responsible for the fires at the MRF? Well, that would be good, but it's a little difficult to do, proven in court of law who was really at fault there. But beyond that is because it is difficult to say, okay, well, did the consumer do something to that battery to cause it to go do a thermal runaway? So why would the battery industry be responsible for that fire if the product was safe until the consumer got a hold of it? So trying to tie the responsible party would be very difficult to do, and so that's one of the reasons we kind of avoided it, because it's kind of a almost potentially a poison pill for any law. And then on top of that, I mean, these PROs are going to set up these collection sites. They're going to do these. They're going to contract with locations to do this collection. So, and the PROs, if it's a true EPR program, they're going to be covering the costs through their members of the PRO, which are going to be those manufacturers who, if there's insurance that has to be carried, that's going to be carried by that stewardship organization, pulling that money from the members. They'll probably pass down some of those insurance company requirements to their contractors. That always happens as well. So it's just, we've never really wanted to get into the weeds on that. We just don't know how well that would even come across in a piece of legislation, because you're trying to assign that third party responsibility that could potentially not help. So ideally, yes, we'd love to see products designed where certainly like a cell phone has got a thermal runaway. You just pop open the battery case, pop out that battery before it melts the whole phone down. I don't know if that's going to come to pass anytime soon. So,
You know, what I was actually getting at is, I think I'll use paint care as an example. When they first came to Minnesota, they said, you have to use our end facilities. And we said, no, we're not going to use your end facilities. We contract directly, and our contracts are very well written to protect us from liability. And if we would have just used theirs versus directly used our own contracts, we would have been leaving ourselves open. And it was a really big issue for them. And I just feel very strongly they should not get to tell you which end sites you must use unless they're willing to cover all that liability. And it was a huge problem for us with paint care. It's still a problem. And that's, more what I'm looking at here. It's if, it's not always, they're not always as tied into that. They don't always have the other areas. They'll prescribe a lot of operational requirements. Some might conflict with what you're supposed to comply with already. And they're digging into operations in such a way that they're really opening themselves up to some on-site liability too. And that those are really the things that I don't see covered that well. So anyway, yeah, the fires, no.
I don't know if this makes sense, but that's partly why the EPR agencies have to develop their own programs and why local governments contract with them. It's not a perfect one, but if you go into a local government's waste facility and you're directed left to the recycling, that's a business. That's business to business, and it's a contract. The liability is on the producers to make sure that that operation is up to the standards that's safe. often the union workers and all of that. So that there is that crossover. It's when it gets through the gate past the scale into the landfill that it becomes the local government's responsibility. So that's where we see the advocacy from the local governments in particular, asking us to stay a little bit out of the operations and allowing them to negotiate business to business on how operations are. It's fine-tuning the balance between how good of a job they do, consider affordability and cost and what we ask for. And so anywhere there's a risk involved, I actually think that usually it's demonstrated they do better than what we would ask for. They're higher than our hazardous waste regulations. They're higher than our transportation regulations. It's the consumer awareness and stuff where there's not so much risk that, they're a little bit cheeky with us.
Yeah, we have the exact opposite. We have people trying to tell us we need to operate like a paint store when we're a full-blown HHW facility, and insisting we follow those requirements, and we simply cannot, and we can't sign a contract due to that. So it there's some things that get interesting, and it's, if they're going to cover the downstream liability, fine, we'll use your facilities, but nobody really should be if you've got a good direct contract, and as a contract user you have protections. And again, it was another sticking point, so I just bring it up. I'd like to see it addressed some way, but it's not, nobody's going to like it.
Liabilities and batteries are the biggest topic we have over and over again.
Yeah, I don't even care about the burning part. I care about us not being stuck with something because we used a facility we didn't want to. But yeah, because it's happened. So. And our contracts pulled us out. They did the things they did. They handled the 3,000 drums, and they handled the 5 million pounds of what was left at another site. And it's so for us, it's really important because we've had those abandonments and those shutdowns historically. I will not belabor this further. I have a whole page full of questions. If nobody else has any.
I think there are 2 more in the chat.
Oh yeah, let's go through
sorry,
those.
maybe 4.
No, keep going. Keep going.
We probably don't have time. I'm gonna stick in the order though. Can you speak about promotion coordination? Is there coordination harmonization among the PRO messaging to ensure outreach is consistent, not conflicting, etc.?
It is mandatory that they consider other agencies in their messaging. All agencies to date hire a coordinated nonprofit that has a 1-800 number. They work with the municipalities to keep the apps. So there's lots of recycling apps, whatever municipality, often for their constituents choose different ones. They have to keep those up to date. The agencies have to coordinate the social media that they would be providing to local governments and doing on themselves. There's nothing conflicting there. For First Nations and Indigenous communities, they do have to work together with one First Nations coordinator that would look at how you pull all materials, regardless of what it is, out of sites that are usually more remote together and in a more harmonized fashion. And then sometimes we purely see that some people don't even know their EPR programs. If you go to I don't know if you have Salvation Armies, but secondhand stores or Value Village, and drop off all your electronics or batteries, those are all collection sites. They get paid by the agencies to collect and sort all of that end-of-life material that can't be done. So we make sure that the communication doesn't hinder that process as well. So it isn't a regulation. They have to coordinate operations and awareness, and it's just cheaper for them to work together. So they really do.
Thank you.
And Jordan, I'll jump in real quick too on AB 2440. We actually require the stewardship organizations, if there's multiple, they do have to coordinate. It's in the law, they have to coordinate so that they make a consistent message across, so we don't have these issues. So that's something we've been thinking about as well.
I'm glad you guys got that in there. Are you seeing a consolidation of collection sites between stewardship organizations, more of a depot approach so people can drop off multiple products at one location? I know we saw that when we were on our CFE trips, and it was I love those depots.
Yeah, we I think have just over 230 depots that do, the bottle deposit system's
wow.
usually an anchor there, but they do all products. Some of them may or may not do some of the hazardous waste, depending on the bylaw zoning where they are. So there's some that can't do some of the more like pesticides or things like that. But so and a lot more can do paint than some of the pesticides. But on the whole, if you go to recycling depot, they should take almost everything that you're trying to drop off that's part of extended producer responsibility. But some people just like the return to retail as well, and some retailers still participate in that.
Great.
We also have mail back as well.
Then we
Wait,
have-
you have mail back for batteries?
Sorry, they do have they do have for not the lithium anymore. Those are going by the wayside, but most electronics you can mail back. So your cell phones. There is a lot. Other than the communities that are air in only, you can do mail back for a lot of your electronics,
Ooh.
as long as they're in the product. And that's why, so what we used to see is people taking a drill and separating the drill battery from the drill, and then trying to put it into the program, even though the drill didn't actually die, it was the battery life that died. And what we're just saying is you try to keep them together, it's safer, and then there's more return options for those sort of products. And our hazardous waste regulations are being written and changed that it's not until I get to a processor and a dismantler that some of those stricter rules take place, because we want to try and see as many electronics shipped and mailed, or different ways, as long as it's safe.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways sort of, I don't think anybody should try getting out of any of the DOT laws, but if you reduce the charge to under 30%, I think a lot of this falls away. I'd have to check on that, but I know that there is a bit of a way around it if you discharge the batteries, but I just don't see that there's any industrial grade discharge type units that we could use, and I would imagine we would still have to sort and tape. But yeah, I saw that.
And we only have one courier, I think it's Perlator,
Oh.
that's trained enough to take all the stuff
Yep,
as well.
that's. I thought maybe we should run them all over. I saw that forklift thing. Let's just run them all over. And then we can handle them safe. Just send all the bits.
But it's the little button cell batteries that we have much more problems with, where people don't see them in things, than I would say necessarily, the bigger bike batteries. People know to handle those better. It's the little bitty things that are getting into the paper that's the problem.
Oh, we just had a truck burn because of an e-bike battery in
Yeah.
it. So it's hard to predict what people are going to do, but we do have the Call to Recycle's e-bike battery program started up here, and we're really happy with that.
Yeah, we
So,
have one of our major electronic groups does e-bikes, and they took on all major retailers, again, the Walmarts and everyone like
nice.
that, because it was just another line item for them to assign it. Call to Recycle is yet to have their plan approved here. I think that they want to do an e-bike program. They're running maybe a voluntary one. And so when they get their plan up and running, we'll have two competing programs for e-bikes.
Ooh, I like competition.
And this is the last question. Looks like someone had a correction on the last comments. That is not correct on discharging batteries.
There's who said that?
George from PRB.
George, I knew it was George. I'm gonna look at that and chat with you a little bit. And it could be that it's only true for some smaller size batteries, but there is it's a long story. So yeah, don't take my word for anything over George's, but but I know that there are some options for discharge. And those are related more to maybe who will accept the battery for transport than a regulation. So.
And then Billy is the last question. He asked, can you share the educational promotional outreach materials that were posted on the collection depots or other physical locations, please? Are all the outreach materials funded by the PROs? Has the provincial government required a time frame of frequent promotion of the batteries EPR collection in BC? And you said, for example, does BC require the refresher promotional campaign of batteries collection like once a year or once every quarter from the PROs? So no, it was a lot, sorry.
So, we can definitely, if you want to email us, I can work with you to get the agencies to share their promotional information. Us as a province, we don't do any promotional information ourselves. We ask that the agencies do it all, but we can work with you for that. Most of the agencies refresh, some of them refresh nationally, so Call to Recycle might be a little bit slower on the refresh unless we demand something in British Columbia that's specific. But yes, most agencies are working really hard to refresh all the time. They do some incredible consumer surveys that I've seen. They know exactly who's not returning things. It's usually males between the 18 and 24 that, don't return 70% of the time. And, older people are returning. People in communities that have different languages and new immigrants have a harder time returning. So a lot of languages, Punjabi or Mandarin, or a lot of languages that we need in communities where it might not be a known that you just recycle everything. So it's very specific to the community you're in, the demographics that might be, if there's a new product, if there seems to be a targeted thing that we need you to address for risk. The packaging program just extended some of to single-use plastics. I can't go a day without seeing their social media stuff. And some local governments are just way more advocates in their area as well, of taking all of this promotional material and sharing it themselves. And they often demand stuff be created because they're the ones seeing the problems of why things are getting into the landfills or why things are getting to their sites. So they're demanding of EPR agencies a little bit better in how to address that. Does that help? It's definitely not perfect, and it's definitely a we push and then they try and do. But we do see the EPR programs better at developing programs than we are that actually grab people's attention. We just have to push really hard to get them to do it. I hope that makes sense.
And so I know we're over time. So Jennifer, you were mentioning potentially sending out another survey, seeing if there's some interest in a follow-up session. Not sure.
Yeah, I'm going to have to check in with NAMA because, of course, I haven't, and but I would like to possibly consider continue with the discussion because things are changing and all the time, and keeping us up to date on this highly dangerous item we're managing is a good idea. I have one last question. I've seen in some of these battery laws that the high energy batteries are being left out of the laws. And I wondered why that was, since they are the most expensive batteries to manage. Is there does that group of the e-bike micro mobility people, are they like, no, we'll take care of it, or why are we why are we missing this huge part of the stream? I've seen it excluded. Is it during negotiations that somebody gets excited, or why? Because if you talk about burdens and safety issues and everything else, those are the batteries that my programs are afraid of, both because they can't afford to manage them and they're dangerous.
So Jennifer, I'll jump in real quick just on California side anyway. The reason we targeted the smaller batteries, et cetera, we wanted to get to the products and the batteries that were causing the problems in the back of the trucks and in the MRFs, at the landfills if they end up getting buried in the landfill. And then it's also kind of picking how many opponents you're going to have. And obviously the more broad you make the applicability of the law, the more opponents you can bring on. And so we were trying to really tackle the heart of the problem initially. and at the same time limit our opponents so we could actually get a bill through. So that does come in the can come in the negotiations as well, but it's really just more strategy for us anyway.
Okay. It's not excluded from our law, and we've talked about cracking ours open again because there are some changes we'd like to make, but I'm like, I don't want to lose that high energy battery coverage because, you know, one battery is equal to the price of a whole drum of the other ones to get rid of. So, okay, that's helpful to know. Is there anything that's being negotiated out of the laws that you think shouldn't be? Anybody? Do we have anybody left on the webinars? Oh, 58 people.
We're all still here. Got about half of what we had.
Well, I'll phrase this another way. What I found when we look at other states to see what their legislation is, right? What they've introduced and that type of thing. And we use that to sort of figure out what to do ourselves. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think we need to look at what the original concept was and go back to that, because what you're doing when you're taking those laws and using them as the basis for yours is you're already including negotiated outcomes, and maybe you do still have a chance at some of these things. And there are also things that people will put in legislation just because it's already in another one. The one I've seen that makes me very frustrated is in an e-waste law, they will tell you that you can't charge. That's none of their beeswax, what you charge to make yourself whole. I have yet to see a program that makes our collectors whole. And if they're not covering labor and they're not covering overhead, and you don't get to prescribe that. So I would just caution everybody to really to look at these things. If you have questions, ask them, set up a meeting with people who have laws and ask about what you originally were trying to do with the program versus what you got. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Jennifer, I'd add in there also it has a lot to do with what is the political will, what is the political climate within your own state, within your own local jurisdiction. How far are they willing to go? I've seen certainly jurisdictions here in California, counties and cities that are they're ready to take the bull by the horns and go all the way, and they might just be able to do it. Because a lot of times with the locals, they fly under the radar. But when it gets to the state, and a state of like the size of California, we're pretty much on the radar. Without anything we do. And so we have to be a little more cautious about what we're willing to tackle. I mean, a good strategy is always to put in everything you want if the author of the bill, a statewide bill, is willing to do so. And then knowing that you're going to have giveaways. There's things that you'd love to have, but you know what, you're going to be up against opposition. It's going to say, oh yeah, you got to give too. It's got to, in the negotiation and the sausage making, as we like to call it, there's going to be give and take on both sides. The best bill is, it's always said the best bill is the one where nobody walks away happy. So that's kind of the way we look at it too. We get as much as we can, and then if we can come back later, we will. As long as we haven't committed not to, we can come back later and fix things later after we show that it can work and it can be done economically and reasonably.
Okay. Did anybody have thoughts about whether, I'm not a huge fan of the point of purchase fees because, you know, ideally it would be embedded in the cost and we wouldn't see it and they would just accept that it's part of doing business. But what I'm seeing with these batteries, I mean, they're so, our existing law is based on manufacturer fees, and our existing law is really good. If you have a battery manufacturer in Minnesota, it's solid. If it's in the US, yeah, you can probably get at them. But trying to capture the thousands of people making every kind of battery embedded object out there, to me, it seems like it might be the fairest way to capture or to get money to fund the programs, because I don't, we have tried to get people to participate, and so as call to recycle, and they'll just ignore you, and it's, you know, and then they're in China, and what do you do? So I don't like them, but I think for this one, that's sort of my thought. Does anybody have any comments on that? Too bad we can't give George a mic.
Well, Christy, I'll let Christy go first if she wants to. I do have an answer for you, but I'll.
I think that's the great debate that staff here talk about, you know, publicly with industry we talk about. I do know that when Call to Recycle decided to charge a visible eco fee in British Columbia, move away from the sort of that hidden. So the fee was passed along and it was hidden as part of their national program.
Right.
We asked them to do the money British Columbia specifically and not fund a national program. Our consumers would only pay for BC. They decided to move to a visible fee. The amount of people that were, I didn't know the batteries were recyclable. Cork even could be recycled. So that trigger that it caused. So I would say that, I look at for the people in the call, that's a very hard one. We talk all the time about the fee should just be part of the product. It's a competitive advantage, how you figure out your program to do the best, to make it cheaper or better, as long as you're held to the same standards. But there's other people who really believe that it's a signal that, oh my goodness, I prepaid recycling, I should use it. So I don't have an answer. There's a debate on both sides, and we just can't figure it out.
And I would add, and we actually encountered this with our two bills, 2440 and 1215. They actually both started off as identical bills in separate houses, both carrying loose and embedded products. And then we separated them out. And the reason we did that is to save one of the bills, and end up saving both of the bills by doing so, because CPSC's default is to go to true EPR, get the manufacturers to fund this so that they change their ways. That discussion that was happening earlier, we were talking about design and design for obsolescence versus design for reuse and repair and and recycling. So it's important. I think it's important to start, if you can, with true EPR, get the producers to actually fund the program. But there are products out there that the reality is it's not going to change the design. Even if they have to fund it, it's not going to change their design, and it may not even get through. And so what we saw with the embedded battery products is it made more sense to go ahead and just to save that end of it and make sure that there was a program, was to go ahead and allow for a visible fee on that. And that's why it got added into the e-waste program instead. But here's the concern we always have about visible fees. For the majority of the consumers out there, when they see a little fee tagged onto their point of sale receipt, they just see it as a tax. It's a tax that's going into that black hole of government. We don't know what it's spent on. We don't see any benefit from it. So it's just government doing what government does. And so unless we can encourage and educate the public to say, no,